The emergency room at St. Catherine's Hospital smelled like antiseptic and broken dreams at 3:47 a.m. on a Tuesday that refused to end. Dr. Elena Vasquez had been on her feet for 14 hours straight, her dark hair escaping from its ponytail in rebellious wisps that she no longer bothered to tuck back. Coffee had stopped working somewhere around midnight, but she kept moving through sheer force of will and the knowledge that people's lives depended on her staying sharp. She was suturing a construction worker's hand when the paramedics burst through the doors with controlled urgency that made her stomach tighten. "Motor vehicle accident, multiple trauma, ETA 2 minutes," called out Jake, the lead paramedic, whose calm voice could make a hurricane sound like a gentle breeze. Elena finished the last stitch with practiced precision. "Room 3, she called to the nurses already moving toward the trauma bay. "And get Dr. Martinez down here." The ambulance arrived with sirens that cut through the pre-dawn quiet like a knife through silk. As the paramedics rolled the gurney through the automatic doors, Elena caught her first glimpse of the patient, a man probably in his early 30s. Unconscious but breathing, his expensive suit torn and bloodied from impact. "What do we have?" she asked, falling into step beside the gurney. "Vehicle versus tree at approximately 60 miles per hour, Jake reported. Patient was conscious at the scene but deteriorated en route. Possible internal bleeding, definite head trauma, vitals are stable but dropping." Elena's hands moved with the efficiency born of 7 years in emergency medicine as she began her assessment. The patient was tall, probably 6'2", with dark hair matted with blood, and strong features that suggested he'd been handsome before physics had intervened. His left hand bore a simple gold wedding band that caught the harsh fluorescent lights. "Sir, can you hear me?" Elena said, checking his pupils with her pen light. No response. "Let's get him to Trauma 2. I need a full CT scan, complete blood panel, and someone find out who he is." As the trauma team mobilized around the unconscious man, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that something about this case was different. Maybe it was the way he'd been dressed. The suit was obviously expensive, custom-tailored, the kind worn by men who made important decisions in glass towers. Maybe it was the wedding ring that suggested someone was waiting for him to come home. Or maybe it was simply that after 14 hours of treating overdoses and bar fights and domestic violence calls, here was someone whose injuries were purely the result of bad luck in physics. "Dr. Vasquez." Nurse Patricia Williams appeared at her elbow with a driver's license and insurance cards. "His name is Alexander Reeves, 34 years old, address in Beacon Hill. No emergency contacts listed yet, but we're working on it." Elena nodded, filing away the information as she studied the CT scans that had just come back. "Subdural hematoma, but it's small. No signs of internal bleeding. The head injury is our primary concern." "Should we prep for surgery?" "Not yet. Let's monitor him closely for the next few hours. Sometimes these things resolve on their own." Elena made notes in his chart, her handwriting the careful script of someone who knew that legibility could mean the difference between life and death. "But I want neuroconsult and hourly checks." The next 4 hours passed in the controlled chaos that was normal for St. Catherine's emergency department. Elena treated a teenager with alcohol poisoning, an elderly woman with chest pains that turned out to be severe anxiety, and twin boys who'd managed to superglue themselves together during what their mother called a science experiment gone wrong. But between each case, she found herself checking on Alexander Reeves. He remained unconscious but stable, his monitors beeping steadily in the rhythm that meant his body was fighting to heal itself. Someone had cleaned the blood from his hair, revealing dark strands that were probably soft when not matted with trauma. His face in sleep looked younger, more vulnerable than the sharp-suited businessman she'd imagined from his expensive clothes. "Any family yet?" Elena asked Patricia during her hourly check. "That's the strange thing. We found his phone in the car, but it's password protected. His emergency contact at work just lists his assistant who won't be in until 9. No recent calls to anyone who might be a spouse despite the wedding ring." Elena glanced at Alexander's left hand, noting again the simple band that suggested long commitment rather than new love. Maybe they're separated. Maybe she's traveling. Maybe he was coming home from a business trip. "Maybe he's in witness protection," suggested Dr. Martinez, appearing in the doorway with the sardonic humor that had made him Elena's favorite colleague. "Rich guy, expensive car, no family contacts, crashed on a deserted road at 3 in the morning. Very mysterious." "Or maybe he's just a workaholic whose wife was asleep when he crashed," Elena replied, but she had to admit the circumstances were unusual. "How's the head injury looking?" "Stable. The swelling's minimal and his latest scans show improvement. He should wake up within the next few hours." Dr. Martinez checked the monitors with the practiced eye of someone who'd been reading vital signs longer than Elena had been alive. "You look like hell, by the way. When's the last time you went home?" Elena couldn't remember. The days had been blending together lately, work becoming the only constant in a life that felt increasingly empty outside the hospital walls. I'm fine. You're exhausted, and don't think I haven't noticed you checking on Mr. Mysterious every 20 minutes. He's my patient. I check on all my patients. Uh-huh. Dr. Martinez's expression suggested he wasn't buying it. Elena, when's the last time you took a vacation, or went on a date, or did anything that didn't involve bodily fluids and medical emergencies? Before Elena could answer, Alexander Reeves made a soft sound that brought both doctors to his bedside immediately. His eyelids fluttered, then opened slowly, revealing gray eyes that were confused, but alert. Sir, can you hear me? Elena said, leaning into his field of vision. You're in the hospital. You were in a car accident. Alexander's gaze focused on her face with an intensity that made her suddenly conscious of her appearance. The escaped hair, the exhaustion she couldn't hide, the fact that she'd been wearing the same scrubs for nearly 16 hours. How long? His voice was rough from the breathing tube they'd removed an hour earlier. About 6 hours. You hit a tree on Route 2. Do you remember anything about the accident? Alexander closed his eyes, concentrating. Rain. I remember rain. He opened them again, meeting Elena's gaze, and feeling like the world was moving too fast. The roads were wet, Elena confirmed. You're lucky. The head injury could have been much worse. My car? Totaled, but cars can be replaced. Elena found herself speaking more gently than she usually did with patients, something about his confusion and vulnerability making her want to comfort rather than simply treat. Do you remember your name? Alexander Reeves. I live in Boston. I work for... He paused, frowning. I work in finance, mergers and acquisitions. Good. That's all normal after a head injury. Do you have someone we can call, family, friends? The question seemed to cause Alexander more distress than his physical injuries. His jaw tightened and he looked away from Elena's face. No, there's no one to call. Elena and Dr. Martinez exchanged glances. The wedding ring on Alexander's finger seemed to mock his words. What about your wife? Elena asked gently. Alexander's laugh was bitter and entirely without humor. What about her? She's probably in Milan with her personal trainer, spending my money and posting Instagram photos of her authentic Italian experience. The pieces clicked into place for Elena: the late-night drive, the expensive clothes, the lack of emergency contacts, the bitter tone when he mentioned his wife. Here was a man running from something, driving too fast on wet roads at 3 a.m. because home felt more dangerous than highway speeds in a storm. I'm sorry, she said, meaning it. Don't be. We've been married for 5 years, but we've been strangers for the last 3. The only reason we haven't divorced is because it would be expensive and complicated, and neither of us has bothered to care enough to start the process. Elena had heard variations of this story before. Successful people whose personal lives had imploded while their professional lives soared. Patients who came to the emergency room with stress-related symptoms or accidents that happened because they were distracted by emotional pain. But something about Alexander's honesty, his willingness to admit failure to a stranger, struck her as unusual. Well, you're going to be fine, she said, checking his pupils again. We'll want to keep you for observation for another 12 hours, but there's no permanent damage. What about driving? When can I... Alexander tried to sit up and immediately winced. Never mind, I don't think I want to drive for a while. That's probably wise. Head injuries can affect judgment and reaction time for several weeks. Elena made notes in his chart. Is there someone who can pick you up when you're discharged? A colleague, friend, family member? I'll call a car service. Mr. Reeves, you shouldn't be alone for the next 24 hours. Head injuries can be unpredictable. Alexander was quiet for a long moment, staring at the ceiling with an expression Elena couldn't read. There really isn't anyone, he said finally. That's pathetic, isn't it? 34 years old, successful career, nice house, and no one who would notice if I didn't come home. Elena felt something twist in her chest, a combination of professional concern and personal recognition. She understood loneliness, understood how success could sometimes build walls instead of bridges, how healing other people could become a substitute for healing yourself. It's not pathetic, she said, it's just temporary. Alexander looked at her with surprise, as if he hadn't expected kindness from someone whose job was to fix bodies rather than souls. Are you always this optimistic about strangers' personal lives, Dr. Vasquez? Elena Vasquez. And no, I'm usually much more cynical. But something about 3 a.m. makes people honest, and honest problems usually have honest solutions. What's the honest solution to a marriage that died 3 years ago but refuses to be buried? Elena considered the question while she checked his IV line. In 7 years of emergency medicine, She'd learned that sometimes the most healing thing she could offer wasn't medication or procedures, but simply the acknowledgement that someone's pain was real and valid. Maybe the honest solution is admitting it's dead and giving yourself permission to grieve it properly, she said. You can't heal from something you won't acknowledge is broken. Alexander studied her face with an intensity that made Elena suddenly self-conscious. You sound like you speak from experience. Everyone speaks from experience. That's how we recognize truth when we hear it. Before Alexander could respond, Patricia appeared in the doorway. Dr. Vasquez, we have a multi-vehicle accident coming in, ETA 5 minutes. Elena nodded, already mentally shifting back into emergency mode. I have to go, she told Alexander. Nurse Williams will check on you every hour. Try to rest. Dr. Vasquez? Alexander's voice stopped her at the door. Thank you for being honest. Elena looked back at him, this successful, lonely man whose life had collided with a tree because he'd been driving too fast away from problems that couldn't be outrun. Try to be honest too, starting with yourself. The next 8 hours passed in the blur of multiple traumas, cardiac arrests, and the endless stream of human crisis that defined Elena's world. By the time she had a moment to check on Alexander again, it was nearly noon and her shift was finally ending. She found him sitting up in bed, looking more alert and significantly better than he had at 3 in the morning. Someone had brought him clean clothes, jeans, and a sweater that suggested he'd called his assistant or had items delivered. The expensive suit had been cut away by the trauma team, but these clothes made him look more human, more approachable. How are you feeling? Elena asked, noting that his color was good and his eyes were clear. Like I hit a tree at 60 miles per hour, but otherwise surprisingly okay. Alexander's smile was the first genuine one she'd seen from him. The neurologist cleared me for discharge. Apparently, I have a remarkably thick skull. That's good news. Do you have somewhere safe to go? I booked a room at the Ritz. Figure I can order room service and feel sorry for myself in style while I figure out what comes next. Elena frowned. Mr. Reeves, I meant what I said about not being alone. Head injuries can be unpredictable, I know. You mentioned that. Alexander hesitated, then met her eyes directly. This is going to sound strange, but would you like to have coffee? I mean, after you're done with your shift. I realize you've been working all night and I'm essentially a stranger who crashed his car because he was running away from his problems, but you're the first person I've had an honest conversation with in months, and I'd like to continue that conversation somewhere that doesn't smell like antiseptic. Elena stared at him, surprised by the invitation and even more surprised by her desire to accept it. She couldn't remember the last time someone had asked her to coffee, the last time anyone had seemed interested in conversation rather than medical consultation. I don't usually socialize with patients, she said. I'm not really a patient anymore. I'm just a guy who learned something important about himself at 3 in the morning and would like to thank the doctor who helped him realize it. Elena looked at Alexander's face, still bruised from the accident but animated now with something that might have been hope. She thought about Dr. Martinez's comments about her lack of social life, about going home to her empty apartment to sleep for a few hours before returning to the hospital for another shift. There's a place called Romano's on 5th Street, she heard herself saying. The owner refuses to serve to-go coffee and lectures everyone about slowing down. It's perfect for honest conversations. Alexander's smile was radiant. What time? Give me 2 hours to go home and remember what I look like under fluorescent lights. Dr. Vasquez? Elena? Alexander's voice stopped her as she headed for the door. I know this is unusual. I know you don't know anything about me except that I'm good at making bad decisions while driving. But I want you to know that this isn't about loneliness or gratitude or some weird transference thing. This is about meeting someone who sees things clearly and wanting to see what else she might notice. Elena felt her cheeks warm with something that might have been pleasure. I'll see you at Romano's. As she walked home through the city streets, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted during the night. Maybe it was simple exhaustion making her imagine connections that weren't there. Maybe it was the strange intimacy that sometimes developed between doctor and patient during crisis. Or maybe it was just that after years of healing other people's broken places, she'd finally met someone whose honesty about his own brokenness felt like a permission to acknowledge her own. Romano's coffee shop was exactly as Elena had described. A small, stubbornly old-fashioned place where Giuseppe Romano treated coffee service like a sacred ritual and refused to accommodate the modern world's obsession with speed and convenience. Elena arrived first, choosing a table near the window where the afternoon light would be kind to her still tired eyes. She'd gone home and showered, trading her scrubs for jeans and a sweater, letting her hair fall loose around her shoulders for the first time in weeks. Looking in the mirror, she'd been surprised to see that underneath the exhaustion and stress she was still recognizably herself. Still the woman who'd gone to medical school because she wanted to heal people. Still the idealist who believed that caring for others was the highest calling. Still someone who hoped that kindness and competence might be enough to build a meaningful life. Alexander arrived exactly on time, moving carefully but steadily. The bruises on his face were more visible in natural light, but he looked alert and determined. He'd changed clothes again, dark jeans and a button-down shirt that suggested casual thought rather than expensive habit. "This place is perfect," he said, sliding into the seat across from her. "It feels like stepping back in time. Giuseppe's been here for 30 years. He says the problem with modern life is that no one takes time to taste their coffee anymore." As if summoned by their conversation, Giuseppe appeared beside their table with the focused attention of a conductor approaching his orchestra. "2 coffees," he announced. "You look tired, doctor. Long shift?" "Very long shift, Giuseppe. This is Alexander. Alexander, Giuseppe." Giuseppe studied Alexander with the shrewd assessment of someone who'd been reading customers for 3 decades. "You look like you've been hit by a truck." "Tree, actually." "Ah, trees are worse. Trucks at least have insurance." Giuseppe's expression softened slightly. "I'll bring you both something strong. And food, you're both too thin." After Giuseppe departed, Alexander and Elena sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the afternoon light play across the worn wooden tables and mismatched chairs. "Thank you for agreeing to this," Alexander said finally. "I wasn't sure you would." "I wasn't sure I would either. I don't usually—" Elena paused, searching for the right words. "My social life hasn't been particularly active lately." "Too much work?" "Too much everything. The hospital, continuing education, trying to keep up with medical advances, dealing with insurance companies, and hospital administration. Somewhere along the way, I forgot that there was supposed to be a life outside of work." Alexander nodded with recognition. "I know that feeling. For the past 5 years, I've been working 80-hour weeks, telling myself I was building something important. It wasn't until last night, driving home from another late meeting, that I realized I wasn't building anything. I was just avoiding going home to a house that felt more like a hotel, and a marriage that felt more like a business arrangement." Giuseppe returned with coffee and an assortment of pastries that he placed between them, with the authority of someone who knew what people needed better than they did themselves. "Eat," he commanded. "Both of you. Stress burns calories and you need strength for whatever comes next." Elena took a sip of her coffee and nearly sighed with pleasure. It was perfect strong but not bitter, rich without being overwhelming. "This is exactly what I needed." Giuseppe has a gift. He can read people's coffee needs like a medical chart. Alexander tried his own cup and smiled. Perfect diagnosis. They talked for 2 hours, conversation flowing with the ease of people who'd moved beyond small talk during the strange intimacy of a medical crisis. Elena told Alexander about medical school, about choosing emergency medicine because she loved the challenge of making life or death decisions under pressure, about the satisfaction of healing people whose names she'd never learn. Alexander talked about his work in finance, about the intellectual pleasure of solving complex merger puzzles, about building wealth for clients while somehow forgetting to build meaning for himself. "What happened to your marriage?" Elena asked gently as they worked their way through Giuseppe's pastries. Alexander was quiet for a long moment, staring into his coffee cup as if it might contain answers. "We met in college. Sarah was everything I thought I wanted. Beautiful, sophisticated, from the right family, ambitious in all the socially acceptable ways. We got married because it seemed like the logical next step, like checking off an item on the successful life checklist. But neither of us really knew who we were yet. I thought I wanted to be the kind of man who had a perfect wife and a perfect house and a perfect career. She thought she wanted to be the kind of woman who married that man. We built this elaborate performance of what we thought marriage should look like, but we never actually built a relationship." Elena understood the feeling. Her own romantic history was littered with relationships that had looked good on paper, but felt empty in practice. Fellow medical students who understood her schedule but not her passion. Doctors who shared her profession but not her values. Men who were impressed by her career but intimidated by her competence. "When did you realize it wasn't working?" "Probably 3 years ago, when Sarah started spending more time planning vacations than talking to me about anything meaningful. But I think I really knew last night, when I was driving home from another pointless meeting, and realized that the idea of walking into my own house made me feel claustrophobic." "So you drove too fast in the rain." "So I drove too fast in the rain." Alexander's smile was rueful. "Not my finest moment of problem solving. But maybe necessary. Sometimes we have to crash before we can change direction." Alexander looked at Elena with the same intensity she'd noticed in the hospital, as if he was trying to memorize her face. "Is that your professional opinion, Dr. Vasquez?" "That's my personal observation, Alexander. Sometimes the only way out is through." They were interrupted by Giuseppe, who appeared with a check and a stern expression. "The dinner rush starts soon. You can't sit here all day drinking coffee and solving the problems of the world." "Can we solve them tomorrow?" Alexander asked, standing carefully. "I mean, would you like to have dinner tomorrow? Somewhere that allows lingering and doesn't require medical emergencies as an introduction?" Elena hesitated. Everything about this was complicated. His recent accident, his marriage that wasn't quite over, her own history of choosing work over personal relationships, the fact that they'd met in circumstances that blurred all normal social boundaries. "I work tomorrow night," she said. "Then lunch or coffee again or whatever fits your schedule?" Elena looked at Alexander's face, seeing hope and uncertainty in equal measure. She thought about Dr. Martinez's questions about her social life, about Giuseppe's command to eat and gain strength for whatever came next, about her own loneliness that she'd been calling independence for so long. She'd almost convinced herself it was true. "Lunch," she said. "But somewhere with food Giuseppe would approve of." Alexander's smile was brilliant. "I'll find the most authentic slow food restaurant in the city." As they parted ways outside Romano's, Elena felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Anticipation that had nothing to do with work schedules or medical challenges. Walking home, she found herself thinking about Alexander's honesty, his willingness to admit failure without wallowing in it, his ability to find humor in his own mistakes. That night, she called her sister Maria for the first time in 2 months. "Elena, what's wrong? Are you sick? Did someone die?" Maria's voice carried the panic of someone whose doctor sister only called with emergencies. "Nothing's wrong. I just wanted to talk." "Oh, okay, that's unusual. What's happening?" Elena told Maria about the accident, about Alexander, about coffee at Romano's and plans for lunch the next day. As she talked, she realized how long it had been since she'd had anything personal to share, how completely her life had become about other people's crises rather than her own possibilities. "So he's married," Maria said when Elena finished. "Separated, essentially. They've been living like strangers for years. But not divorced." "Not yet. But Elena, he's different. He's honest about his mistakes. He doesn't try to impress me with success stories. He asks questions like he actually wants to hear the answers." "And he's devastatingly handsome?" Elena laughed. "Even with facial bruises, yes, but that's not why I like him." "Why do you like him?" It was a simple question that required a complex answer. Elena thought about Alexander's admission that there was no one to call, about his willingness to examine his own failures, about the way he'd looked at her like she was someone worth seeing clearly. "Because he makes me feel like myself," she said finally. "Not Dr. Vasquez, who has her life together. Not the successful professional who doesn't need anyone. Just Elena, who's figuring things out as she goes along." "That's either the most romantic thing I've heard in years or the most dangerous," Maria said. "Maybe both." "Maybe both," Elena agreed. The next day, Elena found herself changing clothes 3 times before lunch, trying to find the balance between professional competence and personal approachability. She finally settled on a dress that was casual but flattering, comfortable but thoughtful. Alexander had chosen a small Italian restaurant that specialized in slow-cooked traditional dishes and refused to rush customers through their meals. When Elena arrived, she found him already seated at a corner table, looking less bruised and more like the successful businessman he probably was on normal days. "How are you feeling?" she asked, slipping into the seat across from him. "Better, clear-headed, like I've been living underwater for years and finally surfaced." Alexander's smile was warm and self-deprecating. "Also, like I have 17 missed calls from my assistant and 100 emails I'm ignoring." "Are you supposed to be working?" "I'm supposed to be resting and making sensible decisions. Having lunch with you feels like the most sensible thing I've done in months." They ordered food that required slow preparation and long conversations. Pasta made fresh that morning, sauces that had been simmering since dawn, wine that Giuseppe would have approved of for its authenticity and attention to tradition. "Tell me about emergency medicine," Alexander said as they waited for their meal. "What made you choose it?" Elena considered the question while she watched Alexander's face. His attention was complete, focused, as if her answer mattered to him in ways that went beyond polite conversation. "I like the immediacy. In emergency medicine, you can see the direct result of your decisions within minutes or hours. Someone comes in broken, and you put them back together. There's no ambiguity, no politics, no waiting months to see if your treatment worked. But there's also no long-term relationships. You heal people and send them away. Usually, yes, which used to feel like a feature, not a bug. I could help people without getting emotionally involved, could make a difference without the messiness of ongoing relationships. Used to feel like. Elena paused as their waiter arrived with wine and warm bread that smelled like Giuseppe's approval. Lately, I've been wondering if I chose emergency medicine because I was afraid of getting attached to people. If I was using professional efficiency to avoid personal vulnerability. What changed your mind? Meeting you partially. Realizing that sometimes the most healing thing you can offer someone isn't medical treatment, but simply seeing them clearly and acknowledging their pain as real. Alexander was quiet for a moment, absorbing her words. That's what you did for me. You saw that I was more than just a head injury. You saw that I was running from something and you didn't judge me for it. We all run from things. The question is whether we're running toward something better or just running away. Which one are you doing? Elena laughed, surprised by the question's directness. I don't know yet, ask me in 6 months. Their food arrived, complicated dishes that required attention and conversation, that couldn't be rushed or consumed while distracted. As they ate, Elena found herself relaxing in ways she hadn't experienced in years. Alexander was easy to talk to, curious about her work without being intimidated by it, intelligent without being condescending, successful without being arrogant. What happens with your marriage? Elena asked as they shared dessert that was too rich for one person but perfect for two. I'm calling a lawyer this week. Sarah and I need to have an honest conversation about ending this officially. We've been in limbo for too long, it's not fair to either of us. Are you nervous about it? Relieved, mostly. The marriage has been over for years. Making it legal is just paperwork at this point. Sarah will be relieved too. She's been waiting for one of us to be brave enough to pull the trigger. What about practically living situation, finances? We'll figure it out. The house is too big for either of us alone anyway, and we've been essentially living separate lives under the same roof. The financial stuff will be complicated but manageable. Alexander paused. Elena, I need you to know that this decision isn't about you. I mean, meeting you helped me see things clearly, but I was already moving toward this realization. I don't want you to feel responsible for breaking up my marriage. Elena felt something relax in her chest that she hadn't realized was tense. Thank you for saying that, I was wondering. The marriage broke up when we stopped trying to know each other. Meeting you just helped me understand what I've been missing, what it feels like to have a real conversation with someone who sees you clearly. After lunch, they walked through the city, talking about books and travel and the strange coincidences that bring people together. Elena found herself paying attention to details she usually missed, the way afternoon light fell across Alexander's face, the sound of his laugh when she told stories about eccentric patients, the comfortable silence that settled between them when conversation paused. I should get going, Elena said eventually, checking her watch. I have a shift tonight. Of course, thank you for lunch, for the conversation, for... Alexander paused, seeming to search for words. For helping me remember what it feels like to be myself around another person. Thank you for asking me. This was exactly what I needed. They stood on the sidewalk outside the restaurant, the afternoon energy of the city flowing around them. Elena felt the strange reluctance to leave that marked the end of particularly good first dates, the desire to extend the experience just a little longer. Elena, Alexander said softly, would it be okay if I called you? Not just for lunch or coffee, but because I'd like to keep getting to know you? Elena looked at his face, still bruised but hopeful, honest in ways that made her chest tight with possibility. She thought about her conversation with Maria, about the choice between safety and authenticity, about what it might mean to let someone see her clearly. I'd like that, she said. I'd like that very much. That night, working her shift in the emergency room, Elena found herself thinking about Alexander between patients. Not in the distracted way that interfered with her work, but in the background hum of possibility that made even difficult cases feel manageable. When Dr. Martinez commented that she seemed unusually cheerful for someone who'd been awake for 36 hours, Elena just smiled and told him she'd had a very good lunch. Alexander called 3 days later, while Elena was at home recovering from a particularly brutal shift that had included 2 cardiac arrests and a 5-car accident. I have a question, he said without preamble. Are you free Saturday afternoon? Probably. Why? There's an art museum downtown that I've never visited despite living here for 10 years. I thought maybe we could be cultural tourists together. Elena smiled, curled up on her couch in pajamas and fuzzy socks. That sounds perfect. Fair warning, I know nothing about art. Perfect. We can be ignorant together and make up our own interpretations. Saturday afternoon found them wandering through galleries filled with centuries of human creativity, arguing good-naturedly about the meaning of abstract paintings, and laughing at the pretentious commentary that accompanied some exhibits. Alexander, Elena discovered, had strong opinions about art that had nothing to do with market value or social prestige. He liked paintings that felt honest, sculptures that suggested movement, installations that made him think rather than simply admire. "This one," Elena said, stopping in front of a small painting tucked between larger, more dramatic pieces. "This one says something." Alexander studied the canvas, a simple landscape, painted in colors that suggested early morning, with light that seemed to move across fields and trees. "What does it say to you?" "That ordinary moments can be beautiful if you pay attention to them. That you don't need drama or excitement to find something worth seeing." "I like that interpretation." Alexander moved closer to read the placard. "It's called Tuesday Morning October, painted by someone named Sarah Chen in 1987. See? Even the title is ordinary, but look at the way she painted the light." They spent 4 hours in the museum, talking about art and life and the strange ways that beauty appeared in unexpected places. Elena found herself watching Alexander as much as the artwork, noticing the way he really looked at things, the way he asked questions that went beyond surface observations. "I'm starving," Alexander announced as they left the museum. "Want to find somewhere that serves food Giuseppe would approve of?" They ended up at a small cafe that specialized in comfort food prepared with respect, the kind of place that understood the difference between fast and good, between convenient and satisfying. Over soup and sandwiches, Elena told Alexander about her worst emergency room disasters, and he shared stories about business deals that had gone spectacularly wrong. "The thing about emergency medicine," Elena said, "is that you learn to make peace with imperfection. You can't save everyone, you can't fix everything, but you can always try to do your best with whatever situation you're facing." "That's probably good advice for life in general," Alexander observed. "I've spent years trying to engineer perfect outcomes to control every variable. It's exhausting. What would happen if you stopped trying to control everything?" Alexander considered the question while he finished his soup. "I might have to trust that things would work out anyway. I might have to believe that good things can happen without being forced." Radical concept. Terrifying concept. Alexander's smile was self-aware, but also kind of liberating. After dinner, they walked through the city center past shops closing for the evening and restaurants filling with Saturday night energy. Elena felt the particular contentment that comes from spending unstructured time with someone whose company requires no effort, no performance, no careful editing of thoughts or feelings. "Elena," Alexander said as they reached the corner where their paths would diverge, "I need to tell you something." Elena's stomach tightened with automatic anxiety. "Okay. I talked to Sarah yesterday. We're filing for divorce next week. It was easier than I expected. She's been wanting to end things too, but neither of us wanted to be the one to bring it up. How do you feel about it?" "Relieved. Sad for the time we wasted trying to make something work that was never really real, but mostly relieved." Alexander paused. "I also want you to know that I'm not rebounding or trying to escape from one relationship into another. This thing between us, whatever it becomes, I want it to be real. I want it to." Elena felt something shift in her chest, a door opening to possibilities she'd been afraid to consider. "I want it to be real too." "Good. Because I'm falling for you, Elena Vasquez. And I wanted you to know that before it becomes so obvious that I can't pretend otherwise." Elena looked at Alexander's face in the glow of the streetlights, seeing honesty and vulnerability and hope. "I'm falling for you too," she said softly. "Which terrifies me, because I'm not good at this. I'm good at medical emergencies and making life or death decisions under pressure, but I'm terrible at emotional vulnerability and trusting that someone might actually want to know the real me. The real you is exactly who I want to know." When Alexander kissed her, it was with the gentleness of someone who understood that some things couldn't be rushed, that real intimacy was built slowly and carefully. Elena felt herself melting into the kiss, into the possibility of being known and accepted, into the radical idea that she might be worthy of love that didn't require her to be perfect or professionally indispensable. The weeks that followed blurred together in the best possible way. Elena and Alexander developed routines that felt natural, rather than forced coffee dates at Romano's, where Giuseppe gradually warmed to Alexander and began offering unsolicited relationship advice, long walks through different neighborhoods of the city, quiet dinners where they talked until the restaurants closed around them. Elena discovered that Alexander was funnier than his serious businessman exterior suggested, that he read poetry when he couldn't sleep, that he volunteered at a literacy program on weekends because he believed that reading was a fundamental human right. Alexander learned that Elena sang off-key in the shower, that she collected vintage medical textbooks, that she cried at animal rescue videos but remained steady during the most traumatic emergency cases. "You're not what I expected," Elena told him one evening as they cooked dinner together in her small apartment. Alexander had insisted on learning to make pasta from scratch, approaching the task with the same methodical intensity he probably brought to financial analysis. "What did you expect?" "Someone more corporate, more concerned with appearances and status. Someone who would be intimidated by my work schedule or bored by my lack of social connections." Alexander paused in his pasta making to look at her. "Your work schedule is challenging, not intimidating, and your lack of social connections just means I get more of your attention. You're not worried about dating someone who works nights and weekends and deals with blood and trauma for a living. Elena, you save people's lives. You make split-second decisions that determine whether someone goes home to their family or doesn't. You see humanity at its most vulnerable, and you respond with competence and compassion. Why would that intimidate me?" Elena felt tears prick her eyes. Previous boyfriends had tolerated her career, or been impressed by it in abstract ways, but none had truly understood what it meant to her or why she'd chosen such a demanding path. "Because most people think it's weird that I chose a job where I rarely get to see the long-term results of my work, where I deal with death and pain and suffering on a daily basis. Most people don't understand that someone has to be willing to stand in the gap between life and death, that someone has to be strong enough to make impossible decisions with incomplete information." Alexander abandoned the pasta and moved to stand in front of her. "You're remarkable, Elena. Not despite your work, but because of it. Because of who you choose to be when everything is falling apart." The divorce proceedings moved forward with a kind of efficiency that suggested both parties were eager to move on with their lives. Sarah, Elena learned, was indeed in Milan, and had been relieved to receive Alexander's call about making their separation official. She was already involved with someone new, the personal trainer Alexander had mentioned, though apparently he was more than just a fitness coach and had been planning to ask for a divorce herself. "It's almost embarrassingly civilized," Alexander told Elena as they sat in Romano's, watching Giuseppe prepare their afternoon coffee with his usual devotion to ritual. "We're dividing assets, selling the house, and wishing each other well. 5 years of marriage, and it's ending with the emotional weight of dissolving a business partnership." "Is that sad or healthy?" Elena asked. "Both, probably. Sad that we never built anything worth fighting for. Healthy that we're both mature enough to admit it and move on." "What will you do? Where will you live?" "I'm looking at condos downtown. Something smaller, more manageable. Somewhere that feels like home instead of a showplace." Alexander paused. "Actually, I have a confession. I've been looking at places in your neighborhood." Elena raised an eyebrow. "Stalker behavior?" "Strategic planning. I like your neighborhood walkable, authentic, close to Romano's. And I like the idea of being close to you, if that's something you'd want." Elena considered this development. In previous relationships, the idea of a boyfriend moving to her neighborhood would have felt suffocating, like an invasion of the independence she'd carefully cultivated. But with Alexander, it felt like possibility rather than encroachment. "I'd want that," she said, "as long as we don't do anything stupid like trying to spend every waking moment together." "Agreed. We both need space to be ourselves, but it would be nice to know that home is somewhere near each other." Giuseppe appeared with their coffee and a plate of biscotti that they hadn't ordered, but that he deemed necessary for their continued well-being. "You two are looking serious," he observed with the directness that made him a neighborhood fixture. "Good serious or bad serious?" "Good serious," Elena said. "We're talking about the future." "Ah, the future." Giuseppe nodded approvingly. "The future is important, but don't forget the present. The present is where love actually lives." After Giuseppe returned to his coffee preparation rituals, Alexander reached across the table and took Elena's hand. "He's right, you know. I keep wanting to plan everything, to figure out how this relationship will work practically. But maybe I should just focus on enjoying what we have right now." "What do we have right now?" "Right now we have coffee that's probably the best in the city, a woman I'm crazy about who laughs at my jokes and challenges my assumptions, and the kind of afternoon that makes me grateful for car accidents that change your life." Elena squeezed his hand. "Right now we have a man who sees me clearly and likes what he sees, who makes me want to be brave enough for love, and the strange certainty that whatever comes next, we'll figure it out together." 3 months into their relationship, Elena experienced her first major test of how love and work intersected in her life. It started with a call at 2 a.m, not unusual for someone in emergency medicine, but this call was different. A multi-vehicle accident had overwhelmed the trauma capacity at St. Catherine's, and they were calling in off-duty staff to help manage the crisis. Elena arrived at the hospital to find controlled chaos ambulances arriving every few minutes, trauma bays full, the kind of mass casualty situation that required every available medical professional to function at their absolute peak. She threw herself into the work with the focused intensity that had made her good at emergency medicine, triaging patients, stabilizing critical injuries, making rapid-fire decisions about who could wait and who needed immediate intervention. She worked for 14 hours straight, taking only brief breaks for coffee and the kind of quick, efficient meals that could be consumed while walking between patient rooms. By the time the crisis passed, and the last patient had been either treated and released or admitted for ongoing care, Elena was exhausted in ways that went beyond physical fatigue. She called Alexander from the hospital parking lot at 6 p.m., suddenly desperate to hear his voice. "Elena? How are you? I've been worried. I saw the news about the accident." "I'm okay, tired, but okay. It was intense. Do you want to talk about it?" Elena considered the question. She'd never really shared the emotional weight of her work with anyone. Previous boyfriends had either been too squeamish to hear details or too detached to understand why the work affected her so deeply. "Yes," she said, "but not over the phone. Can I come over?" "Of course, I'll order food from that place you like, the one that delivers comfort food that actually comforts." Elena drove to Alexander's temporary apartment, a furnished rental he'd chosen while house hunting, and found him waiting with takeout containers from her favorite restaurant and a bottle of wine that promised to smooth the rough edges of a difficult day. "Tell me," he said simply. After she'd changed into the spare clothes she'd started keeping at his place and settled beside him on the couch. Elena told him about the accident. A drunk driver who had crossed the median and hit a family of 4, causing a chain reaction that involved 8 vehicles and 13 people. She told him about the 6-year-old girl who had been critically injured, about the elderly man who hadn't survived despite their best efforts, about the young mother who kept asking for her husband while Elena worked to stop her internal bleeding. "The hardest part," Elena said, accepting a glass of wine that she hoped would help her sleep when she finally made it to bed, "is that after 14 hours of trying to put people back together, I have to go home and pretend that life is normal, that I can switch from making life and death decisions to worrying about what to have for dinner." Alexander listened without trying to fix anything, without offering solutions or platitudes. He asked questions that showed he was really hearing her, that he understood the weight of responsibility she carried and the emotional toll of bearing witness to human trauma on a regular basis. "How do you process it?" he asked. "How do you carry that kind of experience without it overwhelming everything else?" "Usually I don't process it. I just compartmentalize it and move on to the next shift. But lately, since we've been together, I've been thinking about it more, about what it means to see so much pain and suffering, about how it affects the way I think about my own life." "How does it affect it?" Elena was quiet for a long moment, trying to articulate something she'd never really examined before. "It makes me grateful for ordinary moments, for nights like this, when the most serious decision I have to make is whether to order dessert. But it also makes me afraid of getting too attached to happiness because I see every day how quickly things can change." "Is that why you've avoided relationships, because you're afraid of losing what you care about?" "Partially, but also because it's easier to focus on other people's emergencies than to deal with my own emotional stuff." Elena looked at Alexander's face, seeing understanding rather than judgment. "I'm terrified of needing you, Alexander, of becoming someone who depends on another person for happiness. What if needing someone isn't the same as losing yourself? What if it's just part of being human?" Elena leaned against Alexander's shoulder, feeling some of the day's tension finally beginning to release. "I don't know how to do that, how to need someone without disappearing into the relationship. We'll figure it out together. That's what partners do, they figure things out together." That night, Elena slept deeply for the first time in months, wrapped in Alexander's arms and the security of being with someone who could handle her work, her fears, and her need for both independence and connection. The next morning, she woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of Alexander moving quietly around the kitchen, trying not to wake her. When she finally emerged from the bedroom, she found him reading the newspaper at the small dining table, fully dressed for work but showing no signs of impatience about her late start. "Good morning," he said, looking up with a smile that made her chest warm with affection. "There's coffee, and I called your hospital to make sure you weren't scheduled today." "You called my hospital?" "I called the general number and asked about emergency department staffing schedules. I didn't want you to oversleep if you were supposed to work." Alexander's expression was slightly sheepish. "Too much?" Elena poured herself coffee and sat down across from him. "No, thoughtful. I'm not used to having someone who thinks about my schedule. I'm not used to caring about someone whose schedule involves saving lives. We're both learning." As Elena got ready for her day off, a rare luxury in her usual routine, she found herself thinking about Alexander's words. They were both learning. learning how to be together without losing themselves, learning how to care for each other while maintaining their individual identities, learning how to build something real without forcing it to look like anyone else's idea of what love should be. Over the next few months, they developed rhythms that accommodated both Elena's unpredictable work schedule and Alexander's more traditional business hours. Alexander learned to cook meals that could be easily reheated when Elena came home from late shifts. Elena learned to appreciate quiet mornings when Alexander left for the office, and she had time to decompress from emergency room intensity. They spent weekends exploring the city like tourists, discovering neighborhoods they'd never visited despite living in Boston for years. They found bookstores that specialized in obscure medical texts and financial journals, art galleries that featured local artists whose work felt honest rather than commercial, restaurants that prioritized quality over speed. "I like who I am when I'm with you," Elena told Alexander one Sunday afternoon as they walked through the public garden, watching families feed ducks and couples argue about which path to take. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I like the version of myself that exists in this relationship. I'm still me, still driven, still focused on my work, still somewhat antisocial and overly analytical, but I'm also more relaxed, more open to possibilities, more willing to trust that good things can happen without being forced." Alexander stopped walking and turned to face her. "Elena, I need to tell you something." Elena felt her stomach tighten with automatic anxiety. "Okay. I love you. Not just falling for you or crazy about you, I'm in love with you. Completely, irrevocably, in ways that scare me and exhilarate me and make me want to be better than I am." Elena stared at him, feeling her heart race with something that was part panic and part pure joy. "Alexander, you don't have to say anything back. I just needed you to know. I needed to be honest about what this is for me." Elena thought about love, about the patients she'd seen who fought to live for the people they loved, about the families who held each other in hospital waiting rooms, about the fear and courage that came with allowing someone to matter so much that their loss would be devastating. "I love you too," she said, the words feeling both terrifying and inevitable. "I love your honesty, your willingness to change your life when you realized it wasn't working, your ability to see me clearly without trying to fix me. I love that you make me feel brave enough for this." When Alexander kissed her in the middle of the public garden, surrounded by families and couples and the ordinary magic of a Sunday afternoon, Elena felt something settle into place. Not the desperate need she'd always associated with love, but the quiet certainty that came with finding someone who enhanced rather than completed her, who encouraged her to be more herself rather than someone different. That evening, they were having dinner at a small restaurant in Elena's neighborhood when Alexander's phone rang. He glanced at the caller ID and frowned. "It's my assistant. She wouldn't call on Sunday unless it was important." He answered the phone. "Jennifer, what's happening?" Elena watched Alexander's expression change from mild concern to serious attention as he listened to whatever Jennifer was telling him. "When did this happen?" he asked. "Okay, yes, I understand. No, don't do anything until I get there. I'll be in the office in 30 minutes. He hung up and turned to Elena with an apologetic expression. "I'm sorry. There's a crisis with one of our major deals. The client is threatening to pull out, and there are tens of millions of dollars at stake. I have to go in." "Go," Elena said immediately. "Handle your crisis, I understand." "I hate leaving you." "Alexander, I spend my life handling other people's crises. I understand that sometimes work has to come first. What if I'm gone all night? What if this takes until tomorrow?" Elena smiled, touched by his concern but not threatened by his work demands. "Then you'll be gone all night and I'll see you when you're done. That's how relationships with demanding careers work." Alexander leaned across the table and kissed her quickly. "I love you." "I love you too. Now go save your deal." As Elena walked home alone, she realized something had shifted in her understanding of love and partnership. She wasn't angry or hurt that Alexander had to leave for work. She was proud of his dedication, understanding of the pressures he faced, confident that his feelings for her weren't diminished by his professional responsibilities. This was what healthy love looked like, she thought. Two people who supported each other's work, who understood that caring for each other didn't mean being available every moment, who could handle separation without anxiety or resentment. Alexander called her at 2 a.m. from his office. "How's the crisis?" Elena asked, grateful that she was still awake reading rather than being woken by the call. "Managed, mostly. We found a way to restructure the deal that addresses their concerns. I should be done here within the hour." "Good, I'm proud of you." "Elena, thank you for understanding, for not making me choose between you and work." "Alexander, if you were the kind of man who would abandon his professional responsibilities for a dinner date, you wouldn't be the man I fell in love with. Your integrity is one of the things I love most about you. God, I love you." I love you too. Now finish saving the deal and come home when you can. 6 months later, Elena and Alexander had settled into a relationship that felt both stable and dynamic, built on mutual respect rather than desperate need. Alexander had bought a condo 3 blocks from Elena's apartment, close enough for spontaneous visits but far enough to maintain independence. Elena had introduced him to her family, and Alexander had navigated the complex dynamics of a large extended family with the same careful attention he brought to difficult business negotiations. I like him, Maria told Elena after a family dinner where Alexander had charmed their grandmother by asking for her tamale recipe and discussing her immigration story with genuine interest. He doesn't try to impress anyone, he listens more than he talks, and he looks at you like you're the most interesting person in the room. He's good, Elena agreed. Better than I thought I deserved. Maybe you're learning that you deserve more than you thought. Elena considered her sister's words as she and Alexander walked home from her parents' house, holding hands and discussing the evening's conversations. Your family is wonderful, Alexander said. Complicated and loud and full of opinions, but wonderful. They liked you. My grandmother never gives her tamale recipe to anyone. I was honored, and those tamales were incredible. I understand why the recipe is closely guarded. They walked in comfortable silence for a few blocks, enjoying the warm evening and the sense of belonging that came with being accepted by each other's families. Elena, Alexander said as they reached her building, I have something I want to talk to you about. Elena felt the familiar flutter of anxiety that accompanied serious conversations. Okay. Not here, can we go upstairs? In Elena's apartment, Alexander seemed uncharacteristically nervous, pacing her small living room instead of settling onto the couch where they usually had important discussions. What's going on? Elena asked, settling into her favorite chair and watching his restless movement. I've been thinking about our future, about what we want, what we're building together, what comes next. And? Alexander stopped pacing and turned to face her. And I want to ask you to marry me. Elena's breath caught. Alexander! I know it's fast. I know we've only been together for 8 months, but I also know that what we have is real. That it's built on honest foundations. That it's the kind of love that gets stronger rather than weaker over time. Elena stared at him, feeling her heart race with emotions she couldn't immediately sort. Are you asking me now or telling me that you want to ask me? I'm asking you now. Alexander moved to kneel in front of her chair, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. Elena Vasquez, will you marry me? Will you build a life with me that honors both of our dreams and careers? Will you trust me with your heart and let me trust you with mine? Elena looked at the ring, simple, elegant, clearly chosen with thought rather than price in mind. She looked at Alexander's face, seeing hope and vulnerability, and the kind of love that felt like coming home. Yes, she said, the word coming out as barely a whisper. Yes? Yes, I'll marry you. Yes, I love you. Yes, I want to build a life together. When Alexander slipped the ring onto her finger, it fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting for her all along. When he kissed her, Elena felt the same sense of rightness she'd experienced during their first coffee date. The feeling that this was exactly where she was supposed to be, with exactly the person she was meant to love. The wedding took place a year later in the garden behind Elena's childhood home, surrounded by family and friends who had watched their relationship develop with the satisfaction of people who recognized real love when they saw it. Giuseppe catered the coffee service, insisting that proper espresso was essential for any celebration worth having. Dr. Martinez officiated, having become ordained online specifically for the occasion. Elena and Alexander, Dr. Martinez said to the gathered crowd, have shown us what love looks like when it's built on respect, honesty, and the courage to be authentically yourself with another person. They've taught us that the best partnerships don't complete each other, they enhance each other. As Elena and Alexander exchanged vows they'd written themselves, promising to support each other's dreams while maintaining their individual identities, Elena thought about the car accident that had brought them together. Sometimes, she realized, the best things in life came from the most unexpected places, from late-night emergencies and honest conversations, from the willingness to see clearly and be seen clearly in return. I promise to love you in sickness and in health, Alexander said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes, but also in success and failure, in ordinary moments and extraordinary ones, in the times when love is easy and the times when it requires courage. I promise to grow with you without losing myself, Elena replied, to trust you with my fears and my dreams, to build something together that's stronger than either of us could create alone. When they kissed as husband and wife, Elena felt the same sense of possibility she'd experienced during their first coffee date, but deeper now, more certain. This was love that had been tested and proven. Love that had room for two complete people to become even more themselves together. 5 years later, Elena and Alexander were still learning how to balance love and career, still discovering new things about each other, still building a life that felt authentic and sustainable. Elena had been promoted to Chief of Emergency Medicine, a position that challenged her in new ways but allowed her to shape the kind of care her department provided. Alexander had started his own consulting firm, helping family businesses navigate complex transitions with the same integrity he brought to their marriage. They had learned to fight fairly, to support each other's ambitions without losing sight of their shared goals, to create space for both togetherness and independence. They had weathered Elena's father's heart attack, Alexander's business partner's betrayal, the miscarriage that had broken their hearts but somehow made their love stronger. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't crashed that night?" Elena asked Alexander as they sat in Romano's on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, celebrating the anniversary of their first coffee date. "Never," Alexander said without hesitation. "I was heading toward that crash in one way or another, if not literally, then metaphorically. My life was unsustainable. Meeting you didn't cause the crash. It gave me a reason to rebuild something better from the wreckage." Giuseppe appeared with their usual order and a small plate of biscotti he'd baked specially for the occasion. 5 years, he said with satisfaction. "I knew from the beginning you two would last." "How could you tell?" Elena asked. "You listened to each other. Real listening, not just waiting for your turn to talk. That's rare." Giuseppe smiled with the wisdom of someone who'd watched hundreds of couples share coffee and conversation over 3 decades. "Also, you never tried to change each other. You accepted what was and worked with it. Very smart." As they walked home through their neighborhood, the same streets they'd explored during their early courtship, now familiar territory that held layers of shared memory, Elena reflected on the unexpected paths that had led her to this life. She had thought she wanted independence above all else, had built her identity around professional competence and emotional self-sufficiency. But Alexander had shown her that true independence meant being secure enough in yourself to risk vulnerability, strong enough to ask for help, confident enough to love without losing yourself. "What are you thinking about?" Alexander asked, reading her contemplative mood. "How different my life is from what I thought I wanted. How much better it is than what I thought I deserved. Any regrets? Only that it took us so long to find each other. Maybe we needed to become the people we are before we could build what we have," Alexander said, echoing Elena's words from years earlier. Maybe the timing was exactly right. That night, as Elena lay in their bed listening to Alexander's steady breathing and feeling grateful for the ordinary miracle of shared sleep, she thought about love and timing, and the beautiful complexity of building a life with another person. She was no longer the woman who had worked endless shifts to avoid going home to an empty apartment. She was no longer someone who equated independence with isolation, who thought that needing someone meant losing herself. She was Elena Vasquez Reeves, emergency physician and wife, someone who had learned that the bravest thing you could do was allow yourself to be fully known by another person. Someone who had discovered that love wasn't about finding someone to complete you, but about finding someone who inspired you to become more completely yourself. Tomorrow she would return to the emergency room, where she would make life and death decisions and bear witness to human suffering and resilience. Alexander would return to his office, where he would help families navigate complex business challenges with integrity and wisdom. But tonight, they were simply two people who had found each other against all odds, who had built something real and lasting from honest conversation and the courage to be vulnerable. Tonight, they were exactly where they belonged together, but still themselves, in love with both each other and the lives they had created side by side. In the darkness of their bedroom, Elena smiled and closed her eyes, already looking forward to tomorrow's coffee at Romano's, to Giuseppe's inevitable commentary on their relationship, to another day of building something beautiful with the person who saw her most clearly and loved her most completely. Outside their window, the city hummed with its eternal rhythms of crisis and celebration, heartbreak and healing. But inside their home, there was only the quiet contentment of love that had been tested and proven, love that made both ordinary moments and extraordinary challenges feel manageable. Elena Vasquez Reeves fell asleep grateful for car accidents that changed everything, for honest conversations over good coffee, for the unexpected gift of finding someone brave enough to see clearly and be seen clearly in return. She fell asleep, loved and loving, complete and still growing, exactly where she belonged.